In this video, we're diving deep into the complete life story of one of television's most iconic animated characters. Peter Griffin has been making us laugh, cringe, and sometimes shake our heads in disbelief since 1999. But how much do we really know about the man behind the iconic green pants and white shirt? Today, we're exploring everything from his controversial birth in Mexico to his current life in Quahog, Rhode Island, examining every major moment, relationship, and ridiculous adventure that shaped the patriarch of the Griffin family. Peter Lowenbroy Griffin, born Justin Peter Griffin, stands as the central figure of Family Guy, an animated sitcom that's become a cultural phenomenon spanning over 2 decades. Created and voiced by Seth MacFarlane, Peter first appeared on television on January 31st, 1999, right after Super Bowl 33, in the pilot episode Death Has a Shadow. That premiere date turned out to be crucial, as the massive audience gave Family Guy the visibility it needed to become one of Fox's most successful animated series. MacFarlane based Peter's voice on security guards he overheard while attending the Rhode Island School of Design, giving the character that distinctive working-class New England accent that's become so recognizable. The voice captures something authentic about the blue-collar culture of the region, a gruff but somehow endearing quality that makes Peter feel like someone you might actually know. The character himself evolved from MacFarlane's earlier work. Before Family Guy existed, MacFarlane created 2 animated shorts during his college years at the Rhode Island School of Design, and the first was called The Life of Larry, followed by Larry and Steve. These shorts featured a middle-aged character named Larry and his intellectual dog Steve, which would eventually become the template for Peter and Brian. When Fox executives saw these shorts, they were impressed enough to give MacFarlane $50,000 to develop a pilot. After 6 months of hand animation, MacFarlane completed the 11-minute pilot that would become Family Guy. The network executives gave it the green light, and Larry was renamed Peter for the series. The transformation from Larry to Peter involved refining the character design and personality, but that core concept of a bumbling middle-aged man and his wise-cracking dog remained intact. As a character, Peter Griffin represents something very specific in American culture. He's a middle-class Irish-American man in his early to mid-40s, though his exact age has never been officially confirmed and has fluctuated throughout the series. He's overweight, bespectacled, and works blue-collar jobs, currently employed in the shipping department at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. He lives with his wife Lois and their 3 children, Meg, Chris, and Stewie, along with their anthropomorphic dog Brian, at 31 Spooner Street, in the fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island. Quahog itself is modeled after Providence, Rhode Island, giving the show a distinctly New England feel that permeates everything from the locations to the characters' attitudes and speech patterns. Peter's personality is complex in its simplicity. He's essentially a grown man with the mind of a child and operating on impulse and emotion rather than logic or reason. MacFarlane has described him as Archie Bunker without the knowledge of what he's doing, meaning Peter often says and does inappropriate things without understanding why they're wrong. In the Season 4 episode Petarded, Peter takes an IQ test and discovers that his low intellect places him in a category slightly below mentally challenged, but, as the show jokes, higher than a creationist. This revelation explains a lot about Peter's behavior throughout the series. He doesn't mean to cause chaos and destruction. He simply lacks the mental capacity to think through the consequences of his actions before taking them. What makes Peter fascinating as a character is how he embodies both the worst and occasionally the best of humanity. He's selfish, lazy, inconsiderate, and often cruel, particularly in later seasons. He drinks excessively, specifically Pawtucket Patriot Ale, usually at the Drunken Clam Bar with his best friends. He has a short attention span and frequently abandons one wacky scheme for another, as his son Chris points out in one episode. His jealousy toward Lois can reach pathological levels, leading him to assault a whale that kissed her at SeaWorld. He's treated his daughter Meg with increasing cruelty as the series progressed, often using her as a verbal punching bag. He's irresponsible with money, reckless with his family's safety, and prone to making decisions that endanger everyone around him. Yet Peter has also been shown to have genuine love for his family and friends. In earlier seasons especially, he displayed moments of real heart and caring. He's loyal to his friends. He's standing by them through various crises. He's capable of self-reflection and remorse when he realizes he's hurt people he cares about, though these moments have become rarer as the show has continued. There's an innocence to Peter that makes him somewhat sympathetic even at his worst. He's not malicious in the way a true villain would be. He's just profoundly stupid and impulsive, which leads to terrible outcomes that he never intended. The character's creation represents McFarlane's observations of New England culture, particularly the Irish Catholic working-class communities he grew up around. McFarlane has stated that his father had lots of friends who were big, vocal, opinionated Irish Catholics bursting with personality, and Family Guy came from many of those archetypes he spent years observing. This gives Peter an authenticity despite his cartoon absurdity. He feels rooted in a real cultural context, even while doing impossible and ridiculous things. Now that we understand who Peter Griffin is and where he came from as a character, let's dive into his actual life story, starting from the very beginning with one of the strangest birth stories in television history. Birth and early childhood. Peter Griffin's entry into the world was, fittingly enough, completely chaotic and inappropriate. He was born in Mexico City, Mexico, under circumstances that would set the tone for his entire life. His mother, Thelma Griffin, had traveled to Mexico specifically to have an abortion. She went to a clinic called Embryo Bell when she was 6 months pregnant, seeking to terminate the pregnancy that would become Peter. However, the procedure went wrong, or perhaps went right depending on your perspective. Instead of successfully aborting the fetus, Thelma gave birth during the procedure itself. Peter was born prematurely at the abortion clinic, entering the world through what was supposed to be his exit from it. The circumstances of this birth are revealed in the episode Padre de Familia, where Peter learns he's actually an illegal immigrant because his mother never filed his citizenship paperwork after bringing him back to Rhode Island. Thelma explains that she had traveled to Mexico seeking to terminate the pregnancy. But during the procedure, Peter was born instead. Upon seeing her newborn son, something changed in Thelma. Her maternal instincts kicked in despite her previous desire to terminate the pregnancy. She decided to keep him and bring him back to Rhode Island to raise him, though in her overwhelmed state, she forgot to handle the necessary documentation to make him a legal U.S. citizen. This origin story is darkly comedic, which is typical for Family Guy, but it also establishes something important about Peter's existence. From his very first moments, he was unwanted, surviving through sheer accident or fate. His mother tried to prevent his existence, and he came into the world anyway. This theme of Peter persisting despite being unwanted or underestimated would repeat throughout his life in various forms. Peter's biological father was an Irish man named Mickey McFinnigan, whom Thelma had met during a vacation in Ireland approximately 40 years before Peter discovered the truth. Mickey was, and in Peter's own words that he inherited from him, a fat, stinking drunk. He was everything Peter would eventually become, a slovenly, happy-go-lucky, irresponsible alcoholic. But Mickey wasn't present for Peter's birth or childhood. He abandoned Thelma when she became pregnant, leaving her to deal with the situation alone. This abandonment led to Thelma's desperate trip to Mexico and the bizarre circumstances of Peter's birth. After returning to Rhode Island with baby Peter, Thelma faced the challenge of raising a child alone. She was burdened by shame and societal pressures regarding unwed motherhood. To provide Peter with a father figure and herself with support, Thelma eventually married Francis Griffin, a close friend and devout Irish-American Catholic, who agreed to raise Peter as his own son. The exact timeline of when this marriage occurred isn't clearly established in the show. Thelma presented Francis to Peter as his biological father, creating a fabrication that would last for decades. Peter's childhood was far from idyllic. Francis Griffin was not a warm or loving father figure. He was extremely religious, honoring Jesus, God, and the Pope with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. He was stubborn with his views and treated Peter with coldness and barely concealed contempt. In multiple episodes, it's revealed that Francis constantly told Peter he wasn't his father, saying things like, "I'm not your father," directly to Peter's face. However, young Peter apparently interpreted these statements as normal fatherly insults rather than literal truth. And the psychological impact of growing up with a father figure who consistently rejected him would shape Peter's desperate need for approval and belonging that appears throughout the series. Francis's daughter from a previous marriage, Karen Griffin, also lived with them and made Peter's life even more difficult. Karen was a bully who subjected Peter to relentless abuse throughout his childhood, though whether she was technically Peter's stepsister or half-sister isn't entirely clear from what the show reveals. The show has revealed through various flashbacks and references that Karen tormented Peter constantly, taking advantage of his trusting nature and limited intelligence. She was cruel in ways that scarred Peter emotionally, contributing to his later difficulty in setting healthy boundaries and his tendency to trust the wrong people. Thelma herself, while more loving than Francis, was unintentionally neglectful. She had her own problems, including a gambling addiction that's referenced in several episodes. The show has hinted at various forms of dysfunction in Peter's childhood home, painting a picture of an unstable environment. She would leave Peter in Francis's care for extended periods while she pursued her gambling habit, meaning Peter was often stuck with a stepfather who resented him and a stepsister who bullied him. This created an emotionally damaging childhood environment that would have lasting effects on Peter's development. The Griffin household was strictly Catholic, as Francis insisted. Peter was raised in the Roman Catholic faith, attending church regularly and being indoctrinated with Catholic teachings from an early age. Francis's religious extremism meant that Peter grew up in an environment where questioning authority or expressing doubt was not tolerated. This rigid upbringing may have contributed to Peter's later rebellious nature and his complicated relationship with religion. Throughout the series, Peter has shown both deep connection to his Catholic roots and complete willingness to abandon or mock them when convenient. Young Peter was likely a lonely child, with a stepfather who didn't want him, a stepsister who tortured him, and a mother who was often absent due to her own addictions, Peter probably spent a lot of time by himself. This isolation may have contributed to his later desperate need for friendship and his willingness to do anything to keep his friends' approval. And it also might explain his overactive imagination and tendency to drift off into fantasy scenarios, a coping mechanism he developed as a child to escape his unhappy home life. Despite the dysfunction, Peter did develop some positive memories from his childhood. He's mentioned various family traditions and experiences, though many of these were probably embellished or imagined through his childlike perspective. He learned to find humor in bad situations, a survival skill that would serve him throughout his life. His mother, for all her faults, did show him affection at times, giving him some foundation of love even if it was inconsistent. Peter attended school in Rhode Island, though his academic performance was poor, even from a young age. His low intelligence meant he struggled with basic concepts and was likely the target of bullying from other children, as well as from Karen at home. He didn't excel at sports, academics, or really anything, except perhaps getting into trouble. Teachers probably found him frustrating, as he combined genuine inability to learn with a complete lack of focus or discipline. One interesting aspect of Peter's childhood is his relationship with his heritage. Despite being raised by Francis Griffin and taking the Griffin name, Peter's actual ancestry is Irish through Mickey McFinnigan. He also has claimed various other ancestries throughout the show, including African American, Spanish, Scottish, and German roots. Though many of these claims are questionable given Peter's tendency to confuse fiction with reality, what's certain is that Peter was raised in an Irish Catholic household and absorbed that culture deeply, even if he didn't understand or respect many of its tenets. The trauma of Peter's childhood cannot be overstated. Growing up with a father figure who rejected him, a mother who was neglectful despite caring for him, and a sister who actively abused him created deep psychological wounds. Peter learned that love was conditional, that family members could hurt you, and that he had to work desperately hard to earn affection that should have been given freely. These lessons would echo through his adult relationships, manifesting as his pathological need for acceptance, his inability to be alone, and his tendency to cling to friendships even when they're toxic. Yet somehow, Peter survived his childhood, and he made it through those difficult years and emerged as a young man ready to face the world, though deeply damaged and ill-equipped for adult responsibility. He carried with him the scars of rejection, the confusion of never quite fitting in, and the desperate hope that somewhere out there was a place he could belong. Discovery of true parentage. For over 4 decades, Peter lived believing Francis Griffin was his biological father. This belief persisted despite Francis repeatedly telling him otherwise, which Peter apparently interpreted as cruel jokes rather than literal truth. The revelation of Peter's true parentage came in one of the most significant episodes of his life, fundamentally changing how he understood his own identity and history. The catalyst for this discovery was a tragedy that occurred during Meg's birthday party. Peter, honey being Peter, decided it would be a great idea to dress up as Pee-Pants the inebriated hobo clown to entertain at the party. He got extremely drunk and decided to perform a stunt riding a unicycle down the staircase. This went exactly as poorly as you'd expect. Peter lost control and fell off the unicycle, crashing down and landing directly on Francis, who was standing at the bottom of the stairs. The impact was devastating. Francis suffered crushed ribs, a busted spleen, and a punctured lung from the accident. Francis was rushed to the hospital where he lay dying from his injuries. In his final moments, true to character, Francis showed no warmth or forgiveness toward Peter. His last words to his supposed son were harsh and condemning. "Peter, you're a fat, stinking drunk," he told him before passing away. These words, and cruel as they were, contained a strange honesty. Francis was describing Peter accurately, perhaps the most honest he'd ever been with him. Then Francis died, leaving Peter with no final reconciliation or moment of peace between them. The death of Francis affected Peter deeply, though perhaps not in the way a son's death of a father typically would. Peter felt guilt for causing the accident that killed him, but their relationship had been so damaged and cold that Peter's grief was complicated. He didn't mourn the loss of a loving father because he'd never really had one. Instead, he felt a confusing mix of relief, guilt, and a strange emptiness where fatherly love should have been. Brian, seeing Peter's distress and confusion, suggested that Peter visit a hypnotherapist to work through his complicated feelings about Francis's death, and this turned out to be a fateful suggestion. During the hypnotherapy session, Peter's subconscious revealed memories he'd suppressed or never fully understood. Under hypnosis, he remembered Francis telling him over and over throughout his childhood, "I'm not your father." What Peter had dismissed as insults or strange jokes were actually Francis's attempts to tell him the truth. Francis wasn't Peter's biological father, and he'd been saying so for years, but Peter had never truly heard it. Shocked by this revelation, Peter immediately went to his mother Thelma to demand the truth. Who was his real father, if not Francis? Thelma, confronted with the question she'd avoided for decades, finally told Peter the full story. 40 years earlier, she explained, she had taken a vacation to Ireland. While there, she had a passionate affair with a local Irish man named Mickey McFinnigan. The affair resulted in her pregnancy with Peter. Mickey, true to his irresponsible nature, abandoned her when he learned about the pregnancy, leaving Thelma to deal with the consequences alone. This revelation rocked Peter's understanding of his entire life. Everything he'd believed about himself was based on a lie. The man who'd raised him hadn't been his father and had resented him for it. His real father was someone he'd never met, an Irish drunk who'd abandoned his mother. Peter's identity, already shaky given his low intelligence and constant search for belonging, was suddenly even more uncertain. Peter decided he needed to meet his biological father. He was determined to find Mickey McFinnigan and establish the father-son relationship he'd never had with Francis. Brian agreed to accompany him on this journey, and the two travelled to Ireland together. This trip represented Peter's hope that he could find where he truly belonged, that meeting his real father would somehow fill the void Francis had left in his life. Finding Mickey McFinnigan in Ireland wasn't difficult. He was known in his local village as the town drunk, a slovenly man who spent his days drinking and living a carefree, irresponsible existence. When Peter and Brian located him, and Peter explained who he was, Mickey's response was not the emotional reunion Peter had hoped for. Mickey didn't believe that Peter was really his son. After all, he had abandoned Thelma decades ago and had probably impregnated other women along the way. Why should he believe this random American who showed up claiming to be his child? Peter was devastated by this rejection. He sat on a bench with Brian, crushed by the reality that his biological father didn't want him either. It seemed Peter's fate was to be unwanted by every father figure in his life. But then something happened that changed everything. The spirit of Francis Griffin appeared to Peter, along with other spirits in a moment styled after Star Wars. Francis's ghost reminded Peter of something important. "You're a fat, stinking drunk," Francis said, the same words he'd spoken on his deathbed. But this time, they meant something different. These weren't insults. They were a description of both Peter and Mickey, a highlighting their shared nature. Peter realized what he had to do. If Mickey wouldn't believe Peter was his son, based on words or emotions, he'd have to prove it the Irish way, through a test of their shared heritage. Peter challenged Mickey to a drinking contest, the game of drink, where they would match shots until one of them passed out. This was risky, because while Peter was indeed a heavy drinker, Mickey had been drinking professionally for decades longer. The contest was intense. Shot after shot, both men matched each other, displaying impressive alcohol tolerance. But Peter, driven by his desperate need for paternal acceptance, and perhaps aided by his youth compared to Mickey, eventually won. He drank Mickey under the table, remaining conscious while Mickey passed out. This convinced Mickey that Peter must truly be his son. After all, Mickey believed, nobody but a member of his own family could beat him in a drinking contest. Mickey finally accepted Peter as his biological son and welcomed him into his life. Peter was thrilled. He felt an instant bond with Mickey that he'd never felt with Francis. They were similar in so many ways, both stupid, overweight, childish, and irresponsible alcoholics. Mickey even had his own talking animal companion, a sheep named O'Brien, who served as a counterpart to Peter's talking dog Brian. It was like looking in a mirror and seeing his future self, and somehow that made Peter feel like he finally belonged somewhere. The three of them, Peter, Mickey, and the gathered bar patrons, celebrated by singing Drunken Irish Dad, a musical number that expressed Peter's joy at finding his real father, for perhaps the first time in his life. Peter felt genuinely accepted by a father figure without having to work for it or hide who he was. Mickey liked him precisely because he was a fat, stinking drunk, not despite it. But Brian offered an important perspective that tempered Peter's complete rejection of Francis. Brian pointed out that while Francis may not have been Peter's biological father, he had raised Peter like he was his own son for decades. Despite Francis's coldness and resentment, he had provided for Peter, given him a home, and taught him at least some values, even if Peter didn't always follow them. That showed that deep down, Francis really had loved Peter in his own damaged, limited way. Peter accepted this truth. He could acknowledge Francis's role in his life while also embracing Mickey as his biological father. He didn't have to choose between them completely. Francis had been his father in practice, if not in blood, and Mickey was his father in blood, if not in practice. Both had shaped who Peter became, for better and worse. The discovery of his true parentage answered many questions for Peter about why he was the way he was. His alcoholism, his irresponsibility, his happy-go-lucky attitude, despite causing constant chaos. All of these traits came directly from Mickey McFinnigan. Peter wasn't just a failed version of what Francis had tried to raise him to be. He was actually succeeding at being exactly like his biological father. This realization was both comforting and disturbing. It's worth noting that this revelation raised questions about Peter's claimed ancestry. Throughout the series, Peter has mentioned many relatives and ancestors, and all of whom share the last name Griffin, rather than McFinnigan. There's Moses Griffin, Angus Griffin, who Peter claimed invented golfing, Nate Griffin, and many others. These relatives all look practically identical to Peter in shape and size. sharing more resemblance to Mickey McFinnigan than to the Griffin line. This suggests either that the Griffins and McFinnigans share a common ancestor, or that Peter has confused or imagined many of these relatives, attributing the Griffin name to them, because that's the family he grew up believing he belonged to. The discovery of his true parentage represents a pivotal moment in Peter's life. It recontextualized his entire childhood and gave him a new framework for understanding himself. He was no longer the disappointing son of Francis Griffin, who could never live up to his father's expectations. He was the perfect son of Mickey McFinnigan, fulfilling his biological destiny of being an alcoholic man-child. Whether this realization was ultimately healthy or harmful for Peter's development is debatable, but it certainly gave him a sense of identity and belonging he'd never quite had before. Teenage years and high school. Peter's teenage years and time in high school remained somewhat mysterious compared to his childhood and adult life, with the show providing limited concrete information about this period. Based on what we can piece together from flashbacks and references scattered throughout the series, we can make some educated guesses about what Peter's adolescence was likely like. Based on his birth date fluctuating in the show, but Peter generally being portrayed as in his early to mid-40s, we can infer he would have attended high school sometime in the 1970s, though the show's inconsistent timeline makes pinpointing exact dates difficult. This was a transformative period in American culture, with the Vietnam War winding down, Watergate scandal breaking, and social attitudes shifting dramatically. Peter grew up during this tumult, though how much of it actually registered with him is questionable, given his limited intellect. In high school, Peter was almost certainly not a popular kid, based on what we know about his personality and limitations. He wasn't athletic enough to be a jock, smart enough to be respected for his intelligence, or charismatic enough to be one of the cool kids. Given his established traits, he was likely that weird, slightly gross kid who made inappropriate jokes and didn't understand social boundaries. His weight issues likely started or worsened during adolescence, making him a target for bullying. Combined with his low intelligence and impulsive behavior, teenage Peter was probably someone most students avoided or made fun of. One episode, Peter and Lois's wedding, retcons some of the show's previous continuity to suggest that Peter and Lois were actually friends in high school. This later revision of their origin story shows them knowing each other as teenagers before their adult relationship began. If this timeline is accurate, it means teenage Peter had at least one friend in Lois, even if their relationship wasn't romantic yet. Having someone from a wealthy, respected family befriend him would have been a significant boost to Peter's self-esteem during a time when he probably felt like a loser. Academically, Peter was certainly struggling. His low IQ meant that he couldn't keep up with normal high school coursework. He probably barely passed most classes, if he passed them at all. Teachers likely found him frustrating because he combined inability to learn with complete lack of effort or interest. Peter's mind wandered constantly, and sitting still in a classroom would have been torture for someone with his attention span and need for constant stimulation. Despite his academic failures, Peter probably discovered some of his lifelong interests during high school. His love of television, which would become a defining characteristic, likely solidified during this period. The 1970s saw the rise of many shows that Peter references throughout Family Guy, and teenage Peter probably spent hours watching TV instead of doing homework. This became his escape from a home life that was still difficult and school experience that was humiliating. Peter's relationship with Francis remained strained during his teenage years. As Peter went through puberty and became more independent, the tension between them probably increased. Francis's strict Catholic values would have clashed with the rebellious impulses of teenage Peter, even though Peter's rebellion was more out of stupidity than intentional defiance. Francis likely saw Peter's failures in school and lack of direction as confirmation that he wasn't really a Griffin, even though Francis didn't know Peter had picked up his traits from Mickey McFinnigan, and this period probably saw Peter beginning to drink, following in the footsteps of both his biological and adoptive fathers. Irish Catholic culture in New England often had a complicated relationship with alcohol, and teenage Peter probably had access to it earlier than he should have. Drinking became a way to fit in, to numb the pain of his difficult home life, and to feel like he belonged somewhere. The bars and drinking culture of Rhode Island would have been welcoming to Peter in a way that school and home were not. Peter's sexual awakening during his teenage years was probably awkward and inappropriate, foreshadowing his adult behavior. He was likely interested in girls, but had no idea how to talk to them. His approach to romance was probably crude and unsuccessful, earning him rejection after rejection, and this pattern of romantic failure would continue until he met Lois, the only woman who seemed to see something worthwhile in him, despite his many obvious flaws. He probably had few friends during high school. His personality was off-putting to most people, and his stupidity made him difficult to have a real conversation with. Any friends he did have were probably other outcasts, kids who couldn't find acceptance in the normal social hierarchies. These friendships were probably shallow and based more on proximity than genuine connection. The deep, lasting friendships with Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire wouldn't come until much later in his life. Peter's career aspirations during high school were probably minimal to non-existent. He wasn't planning for college or thinking about his future in any meaningful way. He lived entirely in the present and dealing with whatever was directly in front of him without considering long-term consequences. This short-sighted approach to life would continue into his adulthood and cause countless problems for him and his family. One positive aspect of Peter's high school years may have been the development of his sense of humor. Comedy became Peter's defense mechanism and way of getting attention. If he couldn't be smart, athletic, or popular, he could at least try to be funny. His jokes were often crude and inappropriate, but they sometimes landed and got laughs from his peers. This positive reinforcement encouraged Peter to continue seeking laughter, even when his attempts at humor crossed lines or hurt people's feelings. The end of Peter's high school years probably saw him graduating barely, with no real plan for his future. He hadn't been accepted to college and wouldn't have been able to afford it anyway. He had no particular skills or interests that could translate into a career. He was just a not very bright kid from a dysfunctional family in Rhode Island, facing an uncertain future with nothing but his misplaced confidence and ability to ignore obvious problems. What Peter did have, as he left high school behind, was resilience. Despite everything, he had survived. He'd made it through a childhood with an abusive stepsister and cold stepfather, through teenage years where he was probably bullied and definitely unsuccessful. He hadn't given up or completely fallen apart. He just kept going, living day to day, finding small pleasures where he could. This ability to persist despite constant failure would become one of Peter's most defining characteristics, for better or worse. Meeting Lois, an early romance. The story of how Peter met Lois Schmidt is one of the most important chapters in his life, representing the moment when everything changed for him. This meeting has been told and retold through various episodes with some contradictions, but the core story remains consistent. A working-class loser somehow won the heart of a wealthy, beautiful woman who should have been completely out of his league. According to the most commonly referenced version of their meeting, Peter was 18 years old and working as a towel boy at the Newport Country Club. This was not a prestigious job. Peter was essentially there to hand out towels to wealthy people and clean up after them. It was the kind of work that rendered him invisible to most of the club's members. Rich people don't typically notice or remember the staff serving them. And Peter was just another blue-collar worker making their lives more comfortable. The Newport Country Club was the domain of people like the Pewterschmidt family, old money New England aristocracy who treated the club as their natural habitat. Carter and Barbara Pewterschmidt were fixtures there, and their daughter Lois had grown up in this environment of privilege and luxury. She was being raised to marry within her class, to find a suitable young man from another wealthy family, and continue the Pewterschmidt dynasty. She was expected to become a society wife, hosting charity events and maintaining the family's social standing. But Lois had a rebellious streak that her parents either didn't see or chose to ignore. She was bored with the shallow rich boys she was expected to date. They were predictable, pompous, and more interested in her family's money than in her as a person. She wanted something real, something exciting, something her parents wouldn't approve of. Enter Peter Griffin, the towel boy. The exact circumstances of their first meaningful interaction vary depending on which episode you reference. But what's clear is that Peter made an impression on Lois immediately. Not because he was impressive, but because he was genuine in a way the people in her social circle weren't. Peter didn't try to be sophisticated or pretend to be someone he wasn't. He was exactly what he appeared to be. A somewhat dumb, somewhat gross working-class kid, with no filter and no pretensions. Peter was working for Lois's aunt, Marguerite Pewterschmidt, which is how he ended up in Lois's orbit. When he first saw Lois, he was probably stunned. She was beautiful, confident, and completely out of his league. For Peter, who had experienced mostly rejection from women, having someone like Lois actually talk to him must have felt surreal. He probably said something inappropriate or stupid during their first conversation, but instead of being offended, Lois found it charming or at least amusing. The attraction was not logical from Lois's perspective. Peter had nothing to offer in terms of wealth, status, or prospects. He wasn't particularly handsome, smart, or talented. But he made her laugh. He was different from everyone else in her world. And perhaps most importantly, being with him was an act of rebellion against her parents' expectations and the suffocating propriety of her upbringing. If for Peter, falling for Lois was easy. She was the first woman who'd shown him genuine interest and affection. She paid attention to him, laughed at his jokes, and seemed to like him for who he was rather than trying to change him. Peter had spent his whole life being told he wasn't good enough by his stepfather, his peers, and society in general. Lois made him feel valued and wanted in a way he'd never experienced before. Their courtship must have been conducted largely in secret at first. Lois couldn't let her parents know she was dating the towel boy. They would have been horrified and probably would have taken steps to end the relationship immediately. So Peter and Lois had to sneak around, meeting in private and hiding their growing attachment from the people in Lois's life. As their relationship developed and the class differences between them became more apparent, Peter had no understanding of high society etiquette or culture. He couldn't discuss art, music, or politics in the sophisticated way Lois's family expected. He ate with his hands, burped loudly, and said whatever came to his mind without considering whether it was appropriate. For someone from Lois's background, dating Peter should have been embarrassing. But Lois found freedom in Peter's vulgarity. She'd spent her whole life being polite, following rules, and maintaining appearances. Peter represented escape from all of that. With him, she could be herself without worrying about what people thought. She could laugh at crude jokes, eat junk food, and engage in behavior that would scandalize her parents. Peter wasn't trying to impress her or use her for her money. He just genuinely liked her company. The relationship deepened despite all the logical reasons it shouldn't have worked. Peter made Lois feel alive and spontaneous in ways the structured life her parents had planned for her never could. Lois made Peter feel loved and accepted in ways he'd never experienced from his own family. They complemented each other in strange ways. Where Peter was impulsive and thoughtless, Lois could be the voice of reason. Where Lois sometimes got too serious or stressed, Peter could make her laugh and forget her worries. Peter probably knew that eventually he would have to meet Lois's parents, and he must have been terrified. Carter Pewterschmidt was everything Peter wasn't. Wealthy, powerful, sophisticated, and commanding respect wherever he went. When the meeting finally happened, it went exactly as badly as Peter feared. Carter took an immediate dislike to Peter, seeing him as a poor, stupid, inappropriate match for his daughter. He looked down on Peter with open contempt, making it clear that Peter would never be good enough for the Pewterschmidt family. Barbara Pewterschmidt likely shared her husband's opinion, though perhaps expressed it more subtly. Neither parent could understand what Lois saw in this overweight buffoon who worked as a towel boy. They probably assumed it was a phase, that Lois was rebelling and would eventually come to her senses and find an appropriate partner from their social class. But Lois didn't come to her senses. She dug in harder, probably motivated partially by her parents' disapproval. The more they tried to push Peter away, the more determined Lois became to stay with him, and this dynamic turned Peter into forbidden fruit, making the relationship even more exciting and meaningful to Lois. She wasn't just dating Peter anymore. She was choosing her own path despite her parents' objections. For Peter, having his girlfriend's father hate him must have been painful, but also somewhat familiar. Francis had never approved of him either, so parental disapproval was nothing new. Peter probably tried to win Carter over at first, attempting to prove he was worthy of Lois. But every attempt just made things worse. Peter's idea of impressive behavior was horrifying to someone like Carter. The harder Peter tried, the more he revealed how fundamentally incompatible he was with the Pewterschmidt world. Eventually, Peter probably accepted that Carter would never approve of him. Rather than keep trying to change Carter's mind, he leaned into being himself. If they were going to hate him anyway, he might as well be comfortable. This marked an important development in Peter's character. He was choosing authenticity over approval, perhaps for the first time in his life. The relationship between Peter and Lois during this period laid the foundation for their marriage. They were learning each other's personalities, habits, and quirks. Lois discovered Peter's childishness, his love of television and beer, his tendency to create chaos wherever he went. Peter discovered Lois's intelligence, her buried wildness under her polished exterior, her capacity for both patience and unexpected rebellion. They also discovered their shared jealousy issues. Both Peter and Lois were possessive of each other in ways that sometimes became problematic. Peter was insecurely jealous of anyone who showed interest in Lois, probably because he couldn't believe someone like her had chosen him and feared she would realize her mistake. Lois was jealous because she'd chosen Peter over the objections of her family and needed that choice to be validated by Peter's complete devotion to her. Their courtship probably involved a lot of arguments and make-ups, as couples from such different worlds worked through their incompatibilities. But they kept coming back to each other. Whatever their differences, the connection between them was real and powerful enough to overcome the obstacles in their path. As their relationship became more serious, the question of their future together became unavoidable. They were from different worlds, with different expectations and life trajectories. Peter had no money, a limited intelligence, and unclear prospects. Lois had wealth, education, and a planned future laid out by her parents. For them to stay together, one or both of them would have to make major sacrifices and commit to building a life that neither of their families would approve of. The decision they made to actually commit to each other, to pursue marriage despite all the reasons it shouldn't work, represents perhaps the most significant choice either of them ever made. It set the course for everything that would follow, for better and worse. Marriage and starting a family. Peter and Lois's wedding is one of the most referenced events in Family Guy. Though like many elements of the show, the details have been retold with different versions over the years. What remains constant is that their marriage was controversial from the start, unopposed by both families for different reasons, but driven by the couple's genuine affection for each other. Francis Griffin's opposition to the marriage was rooted in religious prejudice. Lois was Protestant, and Francis was a devout Irish Catholic who believed Peter should marry within the faith. He attended the wedding, but made his disapproval clear. In one of his most passive-aggressive acts, Francis taped a sign underneath the "Just Married" sign on the back of the wedding limo that read, "To a Protestant whore." This was Francis's parting shot at a daughter-in-law he felt was leading his son away from Catholic values. He also despised Lois for her German heritage, viewing her background as somehow inferior, despite the Pewterschmidts being far wealthier and more prominent than the Griffins. Carter Pewterschmidt's opposition was based on class rather than religion. He saw Peter as poor white trash, completely unsuitable for his daughter. Carter offered Peter $1 million to not marry Lois, trying to buy him off and end the relationship before the wedding. In a rare moment of principle, Peter turned down the offer. He said that Lois was worthless to him, meaning no amount of money could compensate for losing her, though Carter probably interpreted it differently. This rejection of $1 million, stupid as it might have seemed financially, showed that Peter genuinely loved Lois and wasn't with her for her family's money. One version of the wedding, as shown in Peter and Lois's wedding, retcons much of the show's previous continuity by suggesting they were friends in high school and eloped at Fenway Park because Lois was already pregnant with Meg. This version portrays a more rushed, desperate quality to their union, with pregnancy forcing them into marriage sooner than they might have otherwise planned. However, other episodes suggest a more traditional wedding with guests and ceremony, even if both families were disapproving. According to Death Lives, the wedding went forward despite the disapproval. Peter and Lois exchanged vows, committed to each other for better or worse, and officially became husband and wife. Peter's wedding suit has been shown as both black and blue in different episodes, another continuity inconsistency. during his toast at the reception, and Peter demonstrated his typical inappropriateness by saying, "What more can I say about my beautiful bride than milk, milk, lemonade, around the corner fudge is made," referencing a crude childhood rhyme about body parts. A week before the wedding, Peter wrote to another girl he was involved with, Gretchen Mercer, expressing uncertainty about going through with the marriage. When Lois later discovered this letter, Peter explained that he'd been scared. He was about to marry into a family that hated him, commit to a woman far above his station, and take on responsibilities he wasn't sure he could handle. Lois admitted that she'd been scared too. She was crying in their wedding pictures because she was terrified of the life choice she was making. But despite their mutual fear, they went through with it because their connection was stronger than their doubts. After the wedding, Peter and Lois began their life together. They moved into 31 Spooner Street in Quahog, Rhode Island, the house that would become the center of their family's adventures. The house is a modest 2-story structure, nothing like the Pewterschmidt mansion Lois grew up in, but it was theirs. This represented a significant step down in lifestyle for Lois, going from wealth and luxury to middle-class suburbia, but she'd made her choice. Peter's first job as a married man was at the Happy-Go-Lucky toy factory, where he worked as a safety inspector. The position involved ensuring dangerous items didn't make it into children's toys, which seems ironic given Peter's complete lack of judgment and safety awareness. Still, and it was steady employment that provided enough income for them to get by, even if they would never be wealthy. The couple soon discovered that Lois was pregnant with their first child. Depending on which version of events you believe, this pregnancy either precipitated their marriage or occurred shortly after. Either way, Meg Griffin was born, making Peter a father for the first time. This was a transformative moment for Peter. He was responsible for another human life, a tiny person who would depend on him completely. Peter's performance as a father to baby Meg is unclear from what's shown in the series, but we can infer that he was likely overwhelmed and unprepared. Babies require constant attention, care, and responsibility, all things that don't come naturally to Peter. Lois probably did most of the actual parenting while Peter tried to help in his limited, often counterproductive way. But he loved Meg during this period, before the later seasons transformed his relationship with her into constant cruelty and mockery. The arrival of Meg put financial pressure on the young family. Babies are expensive, requiring diapers, food, clothes, and medical care. Peter's salary from the toy factory was enough for him and Lois, but adding a child to the household stretched their resources. They probably struggled to make ends meet, especially without financial help from the Pewterschmidts, who likely refused to subsidize Peter's family as a way of punishing Lois for her choice of husband. A few years later, Lois became pregnant again. Their second child was a boy they named Chris, after Peter's middle name, and Chris showed signs from early childhood of being very similar to Peter, both in appearance and personality. He was stocky, not particularly bright, and prone to saying strange things. For Peter, having a son probably felt significant. He could try to be the father to Chris that Francis had never been to him, though his limited parenting skills meant Chris would face his own challenges growing up in the Griffin household. The family of four continued for several years before Lois became pregnant a third time. This pregnancy produced Stewie, their youngest child. Stewie was different from birth. Where Meg and Chris were relatively normal children, Stewie displayed bizarre intelligence and sophistication from infancy. He spoke in a British accent, made elaborate plans, Anne seemed to be operating on a completely different level than a baby should. Peter never quite seemed to notice how unusual Stewie was, perhaps because his own limited intelligence prevented him from recognizing genius when he saw it. Peter and Lois also had other children who didn't survive. Peter Jr. was a son who died when Peter shook him too much, a horrifying example of Peter's dangerous incompetence. Dave Griffin was Stewie's twin, who was allegedly killed by Stewie while still in the womb, though the truth of this is unclear. There's also mention of other children in various episodes, though continuity around these siblings is inconsistent. At some point during this period, Peter adopted Brian, a stray dog who turned out to be anthropomorphic and could speak. And the exact timeline of when Brian joined the family varies between episodes, but he became an essential part of the household. Brian was more than a pet. He was Peter's best friend, confidant, and often the only voice of reason in Peter's life. Their friendship would become one of the most important relationships Peter had outside his marriage. Peter's job at the happy-go-lucky toy factory continued for years, spanning the early seasons of the show. He worked under his boss, Jonathan Weed, a strange and somewhat sinister figure. Peter's work ethic was poor, and he frequently goofed off or caused problems at the factory, but somehow he maintained his employment. The job provided structure and income, even if Peter never took it particularly seriously. During these early years of marriage and fatherhood, Peter established the patterns that would define his adult life. He spent his free time drinking at the Drunken Clam with his friends, watching television at home, and generally avoiding adult responsibilities whenever possible. Lois tried to manage the household, raise the children, and keep Peter from causing too much damage, a task that must have been exhausting. The marriage had its difficulties. Peter and Lois discovered they both had jealousy issues, as shown in Stuck Together, Torn Apart, where they briefly split up because of Peter's possessiveness, only to discover Lois had the same flaw. They learned to live with their mutual jealousy, accepting it as part of their relationship. They also weathered Peter's various schemes and disasters, which regularly put the family in jeopardy. But despite everything, the marriage held together. Lois had known what she was getting into when she married Peter. She'd seen his flaws and chosen him anyway. Peter, for all his faults, genuinely loved Lois and his children, even if he showed it in dysfunctional ways. They'd built a life together, imperfect and chaotic, but theirs. The foundation they established during these early years would be tested repeatedly as the years went on. Career journey and employment history. Peter Griffin's career trajectory is one of the most chaotic elements of his life, characterized by job changes, firings, and numerous temporary positions shown in cutaway gags. Understanding Peter's employment history helps explain both how the family has survived financially and how Peter's irresponsibility has created constant instability in their lives. Peter's longest and most significant employment was at the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, where he worked as a safety inspector. This was his job when the series began and continued through Season 1, Season 2, and the first half of Season 3. His role involved inspecting toys to ensure dangerous items didn't make it into products designed for children, which is darkly ironic given Peter's complete lack of safety awareness. He worked on an assembly line, examining toys as they passed by, removing anything that could harm kids. The job suited Peter in some ways. It didn't require high intelligence or complex decision-making. It was repetitive and straightforward, just examining objects and making simple choices. Peter worked under his boss, Jonathan Weed, who despite his odd demeanor kept Peter employed, despite numerous incidents of incompetence and irresponsibility. The factory provided steady income and benefits, allowing Peter to support his growing family, even if they never had much money left over after expenses. Peter's time at the toy factory ended tragically in the episode Mr. Saturday Night. Peter and Lois invited Jonathan Weed to dinner at a nice restaurant, attempting to be sophisticated and impress Peter's boss. During the meal, Weed began choking on a dinner roll. This was a medical emergency that required immediate action. Peter, however, didn't help. He just watched as his boss choked to death at the table, either not understanding what was happening or not knowing what to do about it. Weed's death was ruled accidental, but it ended Peter's employment at the factory. Without their boss, the factory was torn down and closed permanently. Suddenly unemployed, Peter had to find new work. He visited the unemployment office for the first time, where he met Bruce, another man who constantly got fired from various jobs. Bruce helped Peter navigate the unemployment system and offered advice about finding new employment. This experience at the unemployment office was humiliating for Peter, forcing him to confront his lack of marketable skills and education. Peter's next major job came in a fish out of water when he became a fisherman. He purchased his own fishing boat, which he named the SS. More powerful than Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, and the Incredible Hulk put together. A characteristically Peter-like name that was absurdly long and grandiose. He hired 2 Portuguese immigrants named Santos and Pascoal to work as his crew, and they set out to make their living from the sea. The fishing job lasted through the second half of Season 3 and the first half of Season 4. It represented Peter trying to be his own boss, running his own business rather than working for someone else. He apparently enjoyed the independence and physicality of fishing, even though the work was hard and the income uncertain. Being out on the ocean probably appealed to Peter's love of adventure and his desire to avoid the structure and oversight of traditional employment. However, Peter's fishing career ended in disaster in The Perfect Castaway. He and his crew were caught in a hurricane while out at sea. The storm was massive and overwhelming, destroying their boat completely. Peter, Cleveland, Joe, Eyes and Quagmire were stranded, beginning an ordeal that would last for months. The boat sank, Peter's investment was lost, and when he finally returned home, his fishing career was over. The destruction of his boat left him unemployed again, and back at the unemployment office for the second time. In the episode Jungle Love, Peter found his current job at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. He was hired to work in the shipping department, a position that involved moving boxes and handling inventory. This job has remained Peter's primary employment for the majority of the series, providing the stable income the family needs to maintain their middle-class lifestyle. The brewery job suits Peter because it requires minimal thinking and gives him access to beer, 2 things he excels at. He works under various supervisors, including Angela and Opie, or his co-worker, who bit Peter's finger on his first day. The work is physical, but not complex, and Peter can do it without much training or skill. The brewery tolerates Peter's incompetence and frequent absences, though he has been temporarily fired on several occasions for various infractions. One notable firing occurred in Bread Losers, when Peter was caught goofing off at McBurgertown instead of working. He returned to the unemployment office for the 4th time, where Bruce helped him once again. The firing was temporary, and Peter was eventually rehired, but it showed how precarious his employment always is. He survives through some combination of the brewery's desperation for workers and their tolerance for his ridiculous behavior. Beyond these main jobs, Peter has held countless other positions shown in cutaway gags or single episodes. These temporary jobs reveal Peter's chaotic employment history and his willingness to try almost anything for money. He's worked as a member of the NFL's New England Patriots until his behavior got him kicked off the team in Patriot games. He became president of his own micronation when he declared his property independent from the United States in E Paetibus Unum. Though this ended when the US military showed up to reassert control. Peter has also worked as a babysitter for the mob in There's Something About Paulie, taking care of the Don's nephew Big Fat Paulie after the mob helped him buy a car. He became a guinea pig for science experiments in Family Guy, selling his body for medical testing because the ad said they paid handsomely. He served as a gym coach, lottery reader, and mail brewery shipping clerk in various episodes. The range of jobs Peter has attempted is staggering, though most end badly. In cutaway gags, Peter has shown up in even more ridiculous employment situations. He's been Kevin Federline's magic mirror, advising him on how to look like a douchebag. He's worked in numerous professional roles that require advanced education he doesn't have, suggesting these are either fantasies or the show playing with reality for comedic effect. The sheer number of jobs Peter references implies that before settling into longer-term employment, he cycled through positions rapidly, getting fired or quitting at an alarming rate. What's remarkable is that despite his terrible work ethic, limited intelligence, and tendency to cause disasters, Peter has maintained employment almost continuously throughout his adult life. The happy-go-lucky toy factory kept him for years despite his incompetence. The fishing business failed due to weather rather than Peter's actions directly. The Pawtucket Brewery has employed him for the majority of the show's run, despite numerous incidents that should have gotten him fired permanently. This suggests either that Peter is better at his jobs than he appears, that these employers are desperately understaffed, or that there are aspects of Peter's work performance not shown on screen that make him valuable enough to keep around. It's also possible that Lois, with her family connections and resources, has intervened behind the scenes to protect Peter's employment when necessary, though this is never explicitly shown. Peter's wages have presumably been enough to maintain the family's lifestyle at 31 Spooner Street. They're not wealthy, but they have a house, cars, food, and enough discretionary income for Peter to drink regularly at the Drunken Clam. Whether this is realistic given Peter's blue-collar income supporting a family of 5 plus a dog is questionable. But the show doesn't dwell much on financial hardship beyond occasional episodes where money becomes an explicit plot point. The pattern of Peter's employment reveals something important about his character. Despite his many flaws, he does show up to work most of the time. He doesn't completely abandon his responsibility to provide for his family. The jobs themselves may not be impressive, and his performance is often poor, but he maintains employment. This represents one of the few areas where Peter demonstrates something like adult responsibility, even if it's the bare minimum. Friendships and social life. Outside his family, Peter's most important relationships are his friendships with 3 other men who live in Quahog: Glenn Quagmire, Joe Swanson, and Cleveland Brown. These friendships form the core of Peter's social life and provide him with companionship, support, and enablers for his worst impulses. The 4 men spend most of their free time together at the Drunken Clam, a bar in Quahog, where they have become regulars. They sit at the same table, drinking Pawtucket Patriot ale, talking about their lives and occasionally planning adventures or schemes. The bartender, originally Horace and later Jerome after Horace's death, knows them by name and serves them without asking what they want. This routine has become so ingrained that it defines much of Peter's adult social life. Glenn Quagmire is Peter's next-door neighbor and one of his closest friends. Quagmire is voiced by Seth MacFarlane and works as an airline pilot. His defining characteristic is his obsessive sex drive, which has led him into countless inappropriate situations. Quagmire's catchphrase, "giggity," has become iconic, representing his perpetual state of sexual arousal. Despite his disturbing behavior toward women, Peter considers Quagmire a good friend and spends significant time with him. The friendship between Peter and Quagmire is complicated by Quagmire's attraction to Lois. Quagmire has made numerous inappropriate advances toward Peter's wife over the years, openly expressing his desire for her and making Peter uncomfortable. In the episode The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire, Quagmire actually seduced and had an affair with Cleveland's wife Loretta, showing he's willing to betray his friends for sex. Yet Peter continues the friendship, either not fully grasping the threat Quagmire represents, or valuing the companionship enough to overlook it. Quagmire has dated Lois 3 times according to the show, in Stuck Together, Torn Apart, Meet the Quagmires, and Big Man on Hippocampus. These were special circumstances like when Lois thought Peter was dead, or when Peter had amnesia, but they reveal that Quagmire genuinely believes he has a chance with her, and the fact that Peter remains friends with someone so aggressively interested in his wife shows either remarkable forgiveness or remarkable stupidity. Joe Swanson is another of Peter's best friends and neighbors. Joe is a 46-year-old police officer who is paralyzed from the waist down and uses a wheelchair. He's voiced by Patrick Warburton and lives next door to Peter with his wife Bonnie and their children. Joe became paralyzed during his work as a police officer when he fell from a building while pursuing a criminal. Despite his disability, Joe is incredibly strong and capable, often performing amazing physical feats from his wheelchair. Peter's friendship with Joe is perhaps more genuine than his relationship with Quagmire. Joe represents stability and responsibility in ways Peter doesn't, yet they remain close friends. They've been through numerous adventures together, including being imprisoned in a southern work camp in Cool Hand Peter. Joe often serves as the voice of reason among the friends, though he's willing to participate in their schemes when convinced. Joe's wife Bonnie was pregnant throughout most of the series, finally giving birth to their daughter Susie in season 7. During her long pregnancy, Joe dealt with impotence and incontinence as side effects of his paralysis, issues he's discussed with Peter and the other friends. These intimate medical details being shared shows the depth of their friendship and the trust Joe has in the group. Cleveland Brown was one of Peter's original 3 best friends, until he left Quahog to star in his own spin-off show, The Cleveland Show. Cleveland is African American, voiced originally by Mike Henry and later by Arif Zahir. He worked various jobs in Quahog and was married to Loretta Brown until she cheated on him with Quagmire. Cleveland is generally mild-mannered and calm, often serving as the straight man to Peter's ridiculous behavior. When Cleveland left for Steuben, Virginia, in the pilot episode of The Cleveland Show, it created a hole in the friend group. The remaining friends continued their activities without him, though they referenced missing him occasionally. Cleveland eventually returned to Quahog in the episode He's Blah Ak, after his spin-off was cancelled, simply walking back into Peter's life as if nothing had changed. The friends welcomed him back, restoring the group to its original 4 members. During Cleveland's absence, the remaining three friends bonded even more tightly, and they went on road trips, got into trouble, and maintained their routine at the Drunken Clam. When Cleveland returned, there was some awkwardness as everyone adjusted to the restored dynamic, but the friendship picked up roughly where it had left off. The four friends have participated in numerous adventures together. They've been to New Orleans, gotten arrested and sent to a southern prison camp, hunted for the source of a dirty joke, and dealt with Joe's struggles with suicidal thoughts. They've supported each other through divorces, deaths, and various crises, with the bonds between them being tested repeatedly, but generally holding strong. One interesting dynamic in the group is how they handle conflict. In Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, Quagmire's sister was in an abusive relationship, and the friends helped Quagmire commit murder to protect her. This showed they were willing to cross serious legal and moral lines for each other. Similarly, when Joe wanted to die in #JOLO, the others convinced him life was worth living, showing genuine care beneath their usual crude behavior. The friends often sing together, performing musical numbers that reveal their affection for each other. Songs like For Friends and Good Morning show them expressing genuine happiness in each other's company. These moments reveal that beneath the drinking and crude jokes, there's real friendship and even love between these men. Brian Griffin, Peter's dog, occupies a unique position in Peter's social life. Brian is Peter's best friend in many ways, more so than the human friends at the Drunken Clam. Brian lives in Peter's house, is part of his family, and spends more time with Peter than anyone except Lois. Their friendship is central to many episodes, with Brian often trying to guide Peter away from his worst impulses, while also participating in adventures with him. The relationship between Peter and Brian has changed over the show's run. Early on, Brian was clearly the smarter, more responsible figure trying to help Peter. As both characters evolved, Brian developed his own flaws and pretensions, while Peter became more aggressively stupid and cruel. They've remained friends, but with increasing conflict and less genuine affection shown on screen. Peter's social life beyond these core relationships is limited. He knows many people in Quahog through his various adventures and the show's large cast of recurring characters, but he doesn't have other close friendships. The friends at the Drunken Clam are his social world. This limited social circle means that losing any of these friendships would be devastating to Peter, which explains why he tolerates behavior from them that might otherwise end relationships. The friendship group serves multiple functions in Peter's life. They provide companionship and a sense of belonging he's craved since childhood. They enable his drinking and bad behavior, giving him permission to be his worst self. They offer support during crises, even if that support is often incompetent. And they give him an escape from the responsibilities of family life, a place where he can just be one of the guys without worrying about being a husband or father. Major life events and storylines beyond his day-to-day existence, Peter has experienced numerous extraordinary events that have shaped his life in profound ways. These major storylines reveal the range of Peter's experiences and his remarkable ability to survive situations that should have killed him or destroyed his life completely. One of the most recurring elements of Peter's life is his ongoing feud with Ernie the giant chicken. Their conflict began when Ernie gave Peter an expired coupon, which Peter took as a grave insult. This sparked a rivalry that has resulted in multiple elaborate destructive fights throughout the series. These battles are presented in the style of action movies, with explosions, fast-paced chases, and massive destruction of Quahog property. The fights between Peter and the chicken are incredibly violent and prolonged. They crash through buildings, battle on moving vehicles, and inflict injuries on each other that would kill normal humans. The destruction they cause is staggering, with large portions of Quahog being demolished during their confrontations. Yet both Peter and the chicken somehow survive each encounter, and the feud continues. The fights have become a running gag in the show, appearing periodically to interrupt whatever else is happening in the episode. What makes the chicken fights significant is what they reveal about Peter's capacity for violence and his complete disregard for collateral damage. When fighting the chicken, Peter is focused solely on defeating his enemy. He doesn't care about the innocent people whose homes and businesses he destroys. He doesn't stop to consider whether his vendetta is worth the chaos it creates. He just fights, driven by grudge and adrenaline, until one of them is incapacitated or the episode needs to return to its main plot. Another major event in Peter's life was when he founded his own country. In Epetibus Unum, Peter built a swimming pool in his yard, but discovered through a surveying error that his property was not technically part of the United States. Rather than simply fixing the paperwork, Peter declared his house an independent nation called Pretoria. He created his own flag, currency and laws, naming himself president. The initial excitement of running his own country led Peter to make increasingly poor decisions. He befriended dictators like Fidel Castro and Saddam Hussein, who recognized Pretoria as a legitimate nation. He invaded Joe's property to annex his pool, showing that Peter's version of nation building involved stealing from his neighbors, and the situation escalated until the US military arrived with tanks to force Peter to rejoin the United States. Faced with overwhelming military force, Peter surrendered and Pretoria ceased to exist. This storyline revealed Peter's grandiose delusions and his tendency to take small opportunities and blow them up into disasters. Being president of his own nation fed Peter's ego and gave him a sense of importance he'd never had before. The fact that it all came crashing down when real power showed up to stop him demonstrated the limits of Peter's ability to actually control situations. Peter has also died and been brought back to life multiple times throughout the series. He's gone to heaven and met God, been to hell, and had various supernatural experiences. Death himself has appeared to Peter on multiple occasions, and sometimes as an antagonist, and sometimes as a reluctant ally. These brushes with mortality should have given Peter perspective on his life and priorities, but he typically returns from death unchanged, immediately resuming his usual behavior. One particularly significant storyline involved Peter's stroke in McStroke. After eating excessively at a McDonald's parody restaurant, Peter suffered a massive stroke that left him severely impaired. He couldn't speak properly or control his body, reducing him to a childlike state that required constant care. Lois had to feed him, dress him, and manage all aspects of his life. This episode showed how quickly Peter's existence could be destroyed by his poor health choices. Peter eventually recovered from the stroke through experimental treatment, but the episode highlighted his mortality and the consequences of his lifestyle. His obesity, alcoholism, and terrible diet should have killed him long ago. That he survived into his 40s is more luck than good management. Each heart attack, stroke, or injury brings him closer to permanent damage or death. Time travel has featured in several major Peter storylines. In Meet the Quagmires, Peter and Brian traveled back to 1984 when Peter was 18 years old. Peter saw his younger self and the early stages of his relationship with Lois. He decided to change history by not pursuing Lois, leading to an alternate timeline where Lois married Quagmire instead. This timeline was shown to be worse than the original, convincing Peter that despite everything, his marriage to Lois was meant to be, and they returned to the present and restored the original timeline, though with some changes. These time travel episodes play with the idea that Peter's life could have been completely different with small changes. He could have been successful or happy or married to someone else. But the show consistently suggests that Peter and Lois are meant to be together, that despite all logic and reason, their relationship is somehow the correct outcome. Peter has also experienced periods of temporary fame or success that gave him glimpses of better lives before they inevitably collapsed. He became a viral internet sensation, a successful Renaissance fair knight, a country music star, and various other temporarily impressive things. Each time, success went to his head and made him insufferable, leading to the loss of whatever had made him special. These cycles of success and failure show Peter's inability to handle good fortune and his tendency to destroy anything good that comes into his life. The show has also explored alternate versions of Peter's life. In The Simpsons Guy, Peter and his family crossed over into the Simpsons universe, meeting Homer Simpson and comparing their lives. In various multiverse episodes, different versions of Peter with different histories have appeared. These alternative Peters show what he might have become under different circumstances, sometimes better and sometimes worse than the canonical Peter. Peter's relationship with substances beyond alcohol has also featured in major storylines. In 420, Peter became an advocate for marijuana legalization after discovering it helped his hearing loss. He became a passionate activist, fighting against Brian Carter, Pewterschmidt, and the forces opposing legalization. This was one of the few times Peter cared deeply about a political cause, even if his motivation was selfish. Throughout all these experiences, Peter has shown remarkable resilience. He bounces back from things that should destroy him. He survives violence that would kill normal people. He recovers from injuries and illnesses that should leave him permanently disabled. This cartoon invincibility is part of what makes him work as a character, but it also means that Peter never faces lasting consequences for his actions. He can do terrible things, suffer terrible harm, and always reset to baseline by the next episode. Family dynamics and relationships. Peter's relationships with his family members define much of who he is as a person. His role as husband and father has been central to Family Guy since its inception, though how he performs these roles has evolved significantly over the show's run. Peter's marriage to Lois is the foundation of the Griffin family. Despite coming from completely different backgrounds and having little in common beyond their mutual attraction, they've remained married for decades. The marriage has gone through numerous crises, separations, and reconciliations, but it has survived. In Stuck Together, Torn Apart, they split up because of Peter's jealousy, only to discover that Lois had the same flaw. They decided to stay together despite their mutually jealous natures, accepting this as part of who they are as a couple. Lois has often strayed in the relationship, or at least considered straying, as she attempted to seduce Justin Bieber in one episode, showing she's willing to pursue other men when opportunity presents itself. In The Perfect Castaway, she married Brian after Peter was presumed dead at sea, though the marriage was annulled when Peter returned. These near betrayals show that Lois isn't completely satisfied with her marriage, even if she ultimately chooses to stay. Peter has also questioned his sexuality and strayed in his own ways. In one episode, he left his family to pursue a relationship with another man after discovering an attraction to men. While this was temporary and played for comedy, it showed Peter was capable of abandoning his family when something new and exciting captured his attention. His attraction to Lois competes with his attraction to novelty and escape from responsibility. And what keeps Peter and Lois together is harder to define than what drives them apart. They have sexual chemistry that has remained strong throughout their marriage. They make each other laugh, or at least Lois finds Peter amusing in small doses. They've built a life together and have children who depend on them both. Divorcing would be complicated and expensive, especially given Carter Pewterschmidt's involvement in their lives. But beneath these practical reasons, there seems to be genuine affection between them that survives all their problems. Peter's relationship with his oldest child, Meg, has become one of the most disturbing elements of the show. In early seasons, Peter was a neglectful but not actively cruel father to Meg. As the show progressed, his treatment of her became increasingly abusive. He verbally attacks her constantly, calling her ugly and worthless. He excludes her from family activities and makes her the butt of cruel jokes. The entire family treats Meg terribly, but Peter leads the abuse. This treatment of Meg reflects poorly on Peter as a father and as a person. Meg is his daughter, a teenager trying to find her place in the world, and instead of supporting her, he tears her down. He's become the bully that probably tormented him in his own youth, except he's directing that cruelty at his own child. The show has attempted to explain this dynamic in various ways, including an episode where Meg is told her role is to be the family scapegoat, who absorbs all their dysfunction so they can function together. But no explanation truly justifies the level of abuse Peter directs at his oldest child. Peter's relationship with Chris is more positive, but still problematic. Chris is essentially a younger version of Peter, inheriting his father's limited intelligence, childish humor, and tendency to say inappropriate things. Peter sees himself in Chris and generally treats him with more kindness than he shows Meg. They've bonded over shared interests and similar personalities. However, Peter has also given Chris terrible advice and been a poor role model for how to treat women and handle responsibility. In Long John Peter, Peter told Chris that if he wants a relationship with a girl to work, he shouldn't treat her like a human being, which is misogynistic and harmful advice. Peter's example teaches Chris that men can be lazy, stupid, and inconsiderate, and still maintain relationships, and which sets Chris up for his own dysfunctional future. Peter has also been physically rough with Chris in ways that cross into abuse, though this is usually played for comedy. Peter's relationship with his youngest child, Stewie, is the strangest family dynamic. Stewie is an evil genius baby with a British accent who has spent much of the series plotting to kill Lois and take over the world. Yet Peter seems barely aware that Stewie can talk or that his baby is abnormal in any way. Peter interacts with Stewie as if he's a normal infant, completely missing the sophisticated intelligence and murderous intent Stewie regularly displays. This disconnect might be explained by Peter's extreme stupidity preventing him from recognizing genius when he sees it, or it might be that Stewie's abilities are not actually visible to the adults and exist only for the audience and other children. Either way, Peter has been an absent father to Stewie, providing almost no parenting beyond the basics of keeping him alive. Stewie has raised himself with occasional help from Brian, developing his personality and worldview with minimal input from Peter. Peter's relationship with Brian is perhaps his most important. After his marriage to Lois, Brian is Peter's best friend, living in the house as part of the family, but also serving as Peter's companion and advisor. In early seasons, their friendship was touching, with Brian genuinely caring about Peter and trying to guide him toward better choices. Brian would accompany Peter on adventures, talk him through problems, and serve as his conscience. As the show progressed, the Peter-Brian friendship became more toxic. Peter became crueler and less appreciative of Brian's presence. Brian developed his own flaws and pretensions that Peter would mock mercilessly. They've had serious fights and periods where their friendship seemed to be ending. When Brian died temporarily in one controversial episode, Peter's grief was genuine and profound, showing how much Brian actually meant to him. The extended Griffin family also plays roles in Peter's life. His mother Thelma appeared occasionally before her death, maintaining a relationship with Peter despite the revelation about his true parentage. His sister Karen remained an antagonist figure, showing up to make Peter's life miserable whenever she appeared. His biological father, Mickey McFinnigan, has been referenced but appears rarely, living his own life in Ireland. Lois's family, the Pewterschmidts, loom large over Peter's life. Carter Pewterschmidt never accepted Peter as a suitable husband for his daughter and continues to insult and belittle him decades into the marriage. Peter has worked for Carter on occasion and been forced to interact with him at family gatherings, enduring constant reminders that he's not good enough for the Pewterschmidt family. Barbara Pewterschmidt is less openly hostile, but shares her husband's low opinion of Peter. Lois's sister Carol has been divorced many times and occasionally stays with the Griffins between marriages, creating chaos in the household. Her presence tests Peter's patience as she commandeers the house and disrupts their routine. Peter's relationship with Carol is cordial but strained by her drama, as the family dynamics at 31 Spooner Street are dysfunctional but somehow functional. Peter provides income and serves as the nominal head of household, even if Lois makes most of the actual decisions. The children have learned to navigate around Peter's incompetence and cruelty, developing coping mechanisms to survive in a home where their father is more child than parent. Brian serves as the adult supervision Peter should provide, but doesn't. Holidays and special occasions reveal both the best and worst of the family. They come together for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and birthdays, attempting to create normal family experiences. These gatherings often devolve into chaos due to Peter's behavior, yet they keep trying. There's a persistence to the Griffin family, a refusal to completely fall apart despite having every reason to do so, and character evolution and Flanderization. Peter Griffin has changed dramatically since Family Guy premiered in 1999, evolving from a relatively grounded buffoon into an increasingly exaggerated and cruel character. This transformation, often called Flanderization, after a similar process that happened to Ned Flanders on The Simpsons, has been controversial among fans and critics. In the early seasons of Family Guy, Peter was portrayed as a lovable idiot with genuine heart. He made stupid decisions and caused problems, but his intentions were usually good. He loved his family, cared about his friends, and felt remorse when he hurt people. He was Homer Simpson-like in his bumbling fatherhood, incompetent, but ultimately well-meaning. Episodes from seasons 1 through 7 showed Peter as someone you could laugh at, but also sympathize with. The early Peter Griffin displayed moments of real intelligence and insight, even if they were rare. He could hold down a job for years at a time. He sometimes recognized when he'd made mistakes and tried to fix them. He worried about his family's well-being and made efforts to be a better father and husband, even if those efforts failed. The show balanced his stupidity with occasional competence, making him feel like a real person rather than a cartoon character. As the show continued, particularly from season 8 onward, Peter became increasingly exaggerated. His stupidity intensified to the point of being surreal. His cruelty toward Meg escalated from neglect to active abuse. His behavior became more selfish and malicious, with less concern for how his actions affected others. The explanations for Peter's behavior also became more extreme, with the petarded episode establishing that Peter is slightly below mentally challenged on IQ tests. This change wasn't sudden, but gradual, creeping into the show over multiple seasons. Early episodes showed Peter causing problems through incompetence. Later episodes showed him causing problems through deliberate cruelty or such extreme stupidity that it became indistinguishable from malice. The character lost much of his humanity, becoming more of a chaotic force than a person. Peter's treatment of Meg became one of the clearest examples of his character degradation. The show suggests his mistreatment escalated over time, with his verbal attacks becoming increasingly harsh as the series progressed. By later seasons, he was actively trying to hurt Meg's feelings, excluding her from the family and encouraging others to mock her. In Seahorse Seashell Party, Meg confronted Peter about his abuse, calling him a fat, lazy, abusive, blue-collar, Irish Catholic dad who drinks too much and barely supports his family. She told him he was a total embarrassment and a waste of a man. The fact that she was right made the scene powerful, but the show then reset to Peter continuing to abuse her. Peter's intelligence also deteriorated beyond what even his low IQ could explain. He became unable to remember basic information, couldn't follow simple conversations, and made decisions so stupid they defied belief. Where early Peter was dim but functional, later Peter often seemed genuinely mentally disabled in ways that stopped being funny and became uncomfortable. His violence and destructiveness increased as well. The chicken fights, while always violent, and became even more extreme and prolonged. Peter's casual cruelty toward everyone around him intensified. He hurt his friends, endangered his family, and caused massive collateral damage without any remorse or consequences. The show began portraying Peter as essentially a villain protagonist, someone we watch despite rather than because of his likability. Some episodes in later seasons have attempted to pull back on these changes, showing Peter as more caring or thoughtful. In seasons 15, 16, 20, and 21, there were efforts to rehabilitate his relationship with Meg and show him as a more rounded character again. In Peter's Sister, Meg saved Peter from his abusive sister, and Peter showed genuine gratitude and reduced his abuse of her afterward, though this improvement didn't last completely. And the reasons for Peter's character evolution are likely creative and practical. Writers running a show for over 2 decades need to keep pushing boundaries to maintain audience interest. What was shocking in season 1 becomes normal by season 10. So characters have to become more extreme to generate the same reactions. Additionally, different writers have different takes on the character, and as staff changed over the years, so did Peter's portrayal. Seth MacFarlane, as both creator and voice of Peter, has had varying levels of involvement in the show over its run. When he's more involved, Peter sometimes shows more of his original characterization. When other writers have more control, the character can drift further from his roots, and this inconsistency means Peter's personality can vary significantly between episodes even within the same season. The show itself has acknowledged Peter's evolution in meta ways. Characters have commented on how he's changed or gotten worse. Episodes have shown flashbacks to earlier periods where Peter was different. This self-awareness doesn't fix the problem, but it shows the creators recognize it exists. Critics and fans have split on whether the changes to Peter improved or ruined the character. Some enjoy the more outrageous, unpredictable Peter, who will do absolutely anything for a joke. They find the increased absurdity and cruelty funnier than the earlier, tamer version. Others feel the character lost what made him special, becoming just another angry, stupid cartoon dad indistinguishable from other animated sitcom patriarchs, and the comparison to Homer Simpson has become more relevant over time. Early Family Guy differentiated itself from The Simpsons by having a different tone and style. But as Peter has evolved, he's become more similar to Homer, especially later season Homer, who also became dumber and crueler than his earlier incarnation. Both characters went from lovable idiots to aggressively stupid jerks, following parallel trajectories of Flanderization. Despite these changes, Peter remains the center of Family Guy. Every episode revolves around him to some degree. His actions drive most plots, and his personality defines the show's humor. Whether viewers prefer early Peter or later Peter, he's remained compelling enough to sustain a show for over 400 episodes across more than 2 decades. That longevity suggests that however the character has changed, he still works for a significant audience. Cultural impact and legacy. Peter Griffin has become one of the most recognizable characters in television history. His green pants and white shirt instantly identifiable to millions of people worldwide. His impact on popular culture extends far beyond Family Guy itself, influencing comedy, animation, and broader conversations about taste and boundaries in entertainment. When Family Guy premiered after Super Bowl 33 on January 31st, 1999, Peter Griffin entered American households with a massive built-in audience. That premiere date was strategic and successful, giving the show visibility that might have taken years to build through normal scheduling. Peter and his family immediately made an impression, and with the show's irreverent humor and cutaway gag structure distinguishing it from other animated sitcoms. Seth MacFarlane's voice performance is crucial to Peter's success. MacFarlane based the voice on security guards he overheard while attending the Rhode Island School of Design, giving Peter that distinctive, thick New England accent. The voice captures working-class New England culture authentically, while being cartoonish enough to work in an animated context. MacFarlane's ability to sustain the voice across hundreds of episodes while also voicing Stewie, Brian, Quagmire, and numerous other characters showcases remarkable vocal talent. MacFarlane has stated he heard 1,000 Peter Griffins growing up in New England, suggesting the character resonates with people from that region who recognize the type Peter represents. And this cultural specificity gives Peter authenticity, even when he's doing impossible cartoon things. He feels rooted in a real place and culture rather than being a generic everyman. Family Guy was cancelled after its 2nd season, but brought back for a 3rd before being cancelled again in 2002. However, something unusual happened during the show's cancellation. Reruns on Adult Swim drove up interest dramatically, and DVD releases sold exceptionally well, moving over 2.2 million copies in 1 year. This grassroots support from fans led Fox to resurrect the show in 2004, an almost unprecedented move at the time. Peter's return from cancellation made him more than just a character. He became a symbol of fan power and the changing television landscape. The success of DVD sales and cable reruns showed that traditional network metrics weren't the only measure of a show's value. Family Guy became one of the first shows to be brought back primarily because of home media performance, setting a precedent that changed how networks think about their properties. Since returning from cancellation, Family Guy has run continuously, making it Fox's second longest running show after The Simpsons. As of November 2024, the show has aired 426 episodes across 23 seasons. This longevity has kept Peter in the public consciousness for a quarter century, making him a fixture for multiple generations of viewers. Peter has appeared in numerous pieces of Family Guy merchandise. Mezco Toys released the first series of Family Guy figurines in 2004, and with each member of the Griffin family getting their own toy except Stewie, who received 2 different figures. Over 2 years, 4 more series of toy figures were released with various forms of Peter. The character appears on t-shirts, posters, video games, and countless other products. This merchandising has made Peter a commercial property worth millions, extending his presence beyond the television screen. The character has also crossed over into other animated shows, making guest appearances or cameos in The Simpsons, South Park, American Dad, The Cleveland Show, Drawn Together, and Bordertown. These crossovers acknowledge Peter's place in the pantheon of famous animated characters. In The Simpsons, he's depicted as one of Homer's clones and appears in a book of criminals wanted for plagiarismo, a joke about how Family Guy is often accused of copying The Simpsons. These metatextual jokes have become part of Peter's legacy. Peter has also been featured in pinball machines, with Seth MacFarlane recording exclusive material for a 2007 Family Guy pinball machine by Stern Pinball. The character appears in Family Guy video game, released by 2K Games in 2006, and various other gaming properties over the years. Each new medium Peter appears in extends his cultural reach. HarperCollins has published 6 books about the Family Guy universe since 2005, including Family Guy, It Takes a Village Idiot, But and I Married One, and Family Guy and Philosophy, A Cure for the Petarded, a collection of 17 essays exploring connections between the series and historical philosophers. The fact that academic philosophers have written essays analyzing Peter Griffin shows how the character has transcended simple entertainment to become a subject of serious cultural analysis. Critical reception of Peter has been mixed, but generally acknowledges his significance. Early reviews praised his outrageous humor, absurd anecdotes, and goofy yet endearing personality. As the character evolved, critics became more divided. Some found later Peter's increasingly crude and mean-spirited behavior off-putting. Others argued the character lost his distinctive qualities and became too similar to Homer Simpson. Peter's influence on comedy can be seen in how other shows approach animated sitcom protagonists. Characters like Stan Smith from American Dad and Randy Marsh from South Park share some of Peter's characteristics. The bumbling father who causes chaos through stupidity and selfishness. While these shows have their own identities, Peter helped establish certain archetypes and comedic approaches that became common in adult animation. The character has also been part of broader cultural conversations about offensive content and appropriate boundaries in comedy. Family Guy regularly pushes limits with controversial jokes about race, gender, disability, and traumatic events. Peter, as the show's protagonist, often delivers these jokes or participates in offensive scenarios. This has made him a flashpoint in debates about whether comedy should have limits and who gets to decide what's acceptable to joke about. Peter's catchphrases have entered popular culture. His fight with the chicken, his laugh, and various lines from the show get referenced and parodied. The show's cutaway gag structure, often featuring Peter in absurd historical or fictional scenarios, has been widely imitated and parodied. These cultural references ensure Peter remains relevant even to people who don't regularly watch Family Guy. The character represents something specific in American culture. The mediocre white man who fails upward, causes chaos, and faces few consequences. Peter maintains a house, a wife, a family, and steady employment despite being incompetent, cruel, and stupid. This speaks to broader cultural realities about who gets second chances and who can fail repeatedly without losing everything. Whether the show intends it or not, Peter embodies certain privileges and problems in American society. Looking at Peter Griffin's legacy, we see a character who defined an era of animated comedy, helped transform television economics through DVD sales, and became a cultural touchstone for multiple generations. He influenced how adult animation could work, what boundaries could be pushed, and how long animated shows could successfully run. Whether people love or hate Peter, he's become an indelible part of television history. Conclusion. Peter Griffin's life, from his chaotic birth in a Mexican abortion clinic to his current existence in Quahog, Rhode Island, and tells the story of a man who has survived despite everything working against him. He's faced rejection from father figures, struggled with severe intellectual limitations, made countless catastrophic decisions, and yet somehow maintained a family, home, and group of friends for decades. He's a character of contradictions. Cruel but occasionally kind, stupid but sometimes insightful, destructive but resilient. He's hurt the people closest to him, particularly his daughter Meg, while also showing genuine love for his wife and friends. He's caused massive chaos throughout Quahog while somehow maintaining steady employment and avoiding serious legal consequences. He's been to heaven and hell, traveled through time, fought a giant chicken across countless battles, and died and been resurrected multiple times. And Peter represents both the worst and occasionally the best of humanity. He's a cautionary tale about what happens when someone refuses to grow up, take responsibility, or learn from mistakes. But he's also a story about persistence, about continuing to exist, and even find happiness despite being fundamentally unsuited for the life you're living. He's loved despite being largely unlovable, successful despite being incompetent, and still going despite having died multiple times. As Family Guy continues into its third decade, Peter Griffin remains at its center, still causing chaos, still making terrible decisions, still somehow surviving and even thriving in his own dysfunctional way. His story is far from over, and whatever comes next, it will undoubtedly be ridiculous, inappropriate, and somehow exactly what we've come to expect from one of television's most enduring animated characters. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Peter Griffin's entire life, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Cartoon Codex for more comprehensive explorations of your favorite animated characters. We've got plenty more content coming that breaks down the complete histories, relationships, and cultural impact of the characters that have defined television animation. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.